minutes worth in Tuesday's debate on Iran, I gave notice of two issues for today. The first of these was the advice that was given by UN Rapporteur on extrajudicial executions, Philip Alston, on how to improve the special procedures, systems of communication, matter that I don't think was dealt with by the Conservative Party Commission. I already mentioned last time his proposal for dealing with countries with consistently poor levels of cooperation or meaningful engagement, to which I added an alternative on which I'd like an answer from the Minister this afternoon. Mr. Alston made 5 other proposals, including an examination of the effectiveness of the communication system, better integration of the work of the SPs, modernisation of their technology of communications, and so on. There isn't time to mention them all. But they're all worth consideration, and I'd like to know whether we could urge the Human Rights Commission to pick them up. And now that Mr. Alston has ended his 6-year stint as Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial executions, to put him on the list of potential candidates to carry out the work. How else does my noble friend think that we might go about improving the sclerotic and Byzantine edifice of the special procedures? The second issue was left for today was that of Iran's minorities, and the noble Lord Alston concentrated on some aspects of minorities and their treatment. The Kurds have always suffered extreme persecution in Iran, as in other parts of the region. Agents of the regime assassinated their great leader, EBDURREHMANI, at a meeting to discuss peace in Vienna in 1988. And then his successor, Dr. Sharif was killed at the Mykonos restaurant in Berlin in 2001. And in September, I asked the Minister, Alistair Burt, if he would press the Austrians to release the files on QASIMLU's murder, as the Germans did in the case of Sharif Kandi. And I'd be grateful if my noble friend could tell me what progress is being made on that issue. On the situation of the Kurds today, there are 21 Iranian Kurds on death row, including a woman, Ms. Zainab Jalalian, who was convicted of Muhabarabe, enmity against God. The Kurdish Human Rights Project, and I declare an interest as president of the organisation, say that after her arrest in 2008, she was held incommunicado in the Ministry of Detention facility for 8 months before being sentenced to death by the Kermanshah Revolutionary Court. And during her brief trial, which lasted only a few minutes, she was barred from access to her lawyer and was told to shut up by the sentencing judge after making a plea to say goodbye to her family. On the Baha'is, mentioned by Lord Alston, the High Commissioner for Human Rights did write personally to the Iranian authorities asking for an explanation of the circumstances in which 7 members had been held on trumped-up charges since May 2008 and sentenced now by totally irregular proceedings in a court to 10 years imprisonment, in effect for being members of the Baha'i faith. And I declare an interest as acting chair of the Baha'i All-Parliamentary Group. In another case of many, 3 Baha'is have recently begun a 4th year in detention for the crime of their participation in an education program for underprivileged children in Shiraz. They've been sentenced despite a report by an inspector of the Office of the Representative of the Supreme Leader that pointed to their innocence, and have been held for 3 years so far, not in a regular prison, but in the holding cells of the Shiraz office of the Ministry of Intelligence, where they have no windows, beds or chairs, and have only recently been given mattresses. All 3 have injuries for which they've received totally inadequate medical attention. My lords, minorities in Pakistan are having an extremely hard time also. The Parliamentary Human Rights Group just published a report on the situation of Ahmadis in Pakistan, which presents a stark picture of discrimination against that community and the lack of protection from the state against their enemies. The extremist Nabuwat, an organisation that openly incites religious hatred, creating an atmosphere that leads to assassinations and even to well-organised massacres of Ahmadis at their Friday prayers in mosques. Bodies such as the Sipa-e-Sahaba and Lashkar-e-Jangvi, violent anti-Shia organizations, which were banned by Musharraf in 2002, but are still freely operating in Pakistan in spite of their known associations with Al-Qaeda. They relentlessly target minorities, including the Hazara, a small Shia minority in Balochistan, with killings and suicide bombings. An estimated 400 of the Hazaras have been killed and 1,000 injured in the last few years. Thousands more have abandoned their homes and businesses and sought asylum abroad in places like Canada and Australia. My lords, in Karachi too, there's a wave of violence directed against the Ahmadis, Christians, Shia and the MQM, a political party representing the descendants of those who crossed over from India at the time of partition. Nobody is ever arrested for these crimes, and we need to know whether the government or the European Union or the UN, or better still all of them, are going to persuade President Zardari and the federal government to act firmly on the impunity that has been enjoyed by terrorist groups and their extremist ideological allies.
Yeah. I too thank the noble Lord, Lord Alton, for initiating this important debate.